Elon Musk offers to buy Twitter, and the entire left media conglomerate melts down. Over the past few years, more and more, the social media companies have been on a warpath to remove mis and dis and malinformation from any platform that exists, including and maybe most prevalently on Twitter. On the other side of the coin, you have free speech absolutists who have argued free speech should be all the time, whatever you want to say, no matter what it contains, with no limits whatsoever. Are either of these views really correct? Should we protect delicate eyes and ears from words that are literally violence, according to the left, or should we just allow whatever anyone wants to say or watch or do, no matter whom it hurts? And are these really the only two options? Welcome to Church Public. I'm Matt Odegaard. Welcome back to Church Public. I am Matt Odegaard, your host, and I am excited that you have joined me here today. If you haven't already, like and subscribe, and if you could, share this with one person if you find it helpful, because I just want to get the word out about who Jesus is, first of all, and then what is going on in this crazy world and how we are supposed to live as Christians in it. And that, more and more, seems to be really confusing. So I want to help people with that. I want to help people understand how to live in this crazy world, because my goodness, it is crazy, and it seems to be getting weirder and weirder. Today, we're talking about free speech, because it really is important. What is free speech, and is free speech dangerous, and what is mis and dis and malinformation? Those are the three categories that have been promoted by social media and actually the government of the United States. And we're going to look at that because the definitions really do make a difference, as they always do. When you define words, they bring the words into meaning, and if you don't have a real definition of a word, or if you can't decide what is a woman, for instance, or if you're not a biologist, then it's really hard to determine what in the world we're even talking about. And we want to get to that. And we want to get to how Twitter really is at the center of all this, at least this week. And it does make a difference. So we're going to look at that. But before we get to that, I did want to talk about a couple of other things that are going on in the news. First of all, you probably thought that COVID was over. And of course, it's not. I probably shouldn't even say that. Dang, I should have said the other word that is not an actual virusy type word. At any rate, the federal government has said we only have 2 more weeks to slow the spread. I know that sounds like a joke, but it's not actually a joke. They decided that 4 airplanes, just 15 more days, and then for sure we'll be in the clear. So wear your masks on airplanes and other government transportation for just 2 more weeks, because that worked really good the first 2 weeks that we did this, like 900 days ago. At any rate, we're going to leave that for now because I don't care that much. Anyway, there are some good things that are going on in and around the world in terms of saving lives. And that's what I really like to do. I really like to talk about saving lives, because it is our goal as Christians to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. That really is part of who we are. And just a couple of things that are going on in the world that are important to note. The first is that in Florida, and Florida is always the center of the news, of course, but this is a good part of Florida. They recently signed into law this what do I call it? It's a 24-hour law. So basically, mothers, and I'm not going to say birthing persons like the left would like us to say, mothers have to wait 24 hours before they get an abortion, frankly. And the Florida court, this went to court, and they said this isn't constitutional. Of course, there's nothing saying that it isn't. So this law will go into effect. I believe it was on Friday that it went into effect. And that's really good. It just means that they have to wait 24 hours before they get an abortion. And of course, the left went crazy on this and said that this is going to put undue issues on the mothers, and it's going to kill them or something. I don't know. Their arguments are all fairly wacky, but this is going to save lives, because it means that you have to wait 24 hours before a procedure, which really goes back to this informed consent. Like, do people really know what they're signing up for? And this puts a little bit of a stopgap, because if you say this is an actual medical procedure, which many people say that it is, then you have to understand what are the effects of the medical procedure. And this just goes into that waiting period. Of course, the supporters say this impinges on the woman's right to privacy, and I don't understand how that is, but these are the arguments. Florida argued that this gives women the necessary time to consider the important informed consent disclosures. And let's see, anything else we want to talk about on that? I mean, it's just really good. Yeah, here's an organization that went against this bill, the ACLU. that said the law jeopardizes patients' health and undermines the privacy of Floridians' abortion decision. So there you go. At any rate, this is a great step. This is a great step because sometimes people get desperate, and we know that people get desperate. Perhaps you in your life sometime have been desperate. And when you get desperate, you do things, and sometimes you make choices that you wouldn't otherwise make. We all know this. We all do this. And this is a little bit of a time stop to say, like, hey, maybe consider, is this the best thing? Is it the best thing? And I'll be just really frank, to kill your baby. And in every situation, I'm going to say, no, that's not the best thing. The baby did nothing wrong. The baby does not deserve to die. But, of course, the other advocates on the other side have all these euphemisms for why it is a good thing. I'm going to argue against every single one of them, and I have in other episodes. I'm not going to do that here. I just wanted to say that this is a really good step. In other news, in Kentucky, there was a bill that was similar to the Texas bill, but it actually included other things. In this Kentucky bill, it went through, actually, but then got to the governor's desk. And if you understand, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill and how that whole thing works, I know that's federal and state, whatever. That the governor decided to veto this bill and say that, no, you can't impose any of these abortion restrictions. But then the Kentucky lawmakers actually overrode the governor's veto. I know this is getting confusing. It's like, who's on first? But essentially, the bill went through. The governor said no. Then the lawmakers said, no, governor, you actually can't say no. It's complicated how that works. I'm not going to get into that. It doesn't really matter. That's part of the legal system. But the good news on this is this bill will go through in Kentucky, and it does things like restriction on abortion after 15 weeks. That's good. It's not good enough, but hey, we'll take a win where we can. It ends telemedicine. And telemedicine, again, another euphemism in this sense, is that you can call a phone number and get a pill that, again, kills a baby. It ends that. This is fantastic news. Or at least you have to go and get an in-person visit. Again, not the best, but it's still something. And that a physician who distributes this pill has to be certified. Again, they're just putting into some things. Let's see, anything else in this? Parental consent rules, updating parental consent rules. Again, like, in other words, you have to get parental consent to be able to get some of these procedures. This is important because in a lot of states, there are minors that can just go in and get these procedures and no one has to know. That is actually terrible. Again, we need to protect our children. We need to protect our children that are unborn. We need to protect our children that may not have all of the information or may not be thinking through the rest of their lives and thinking like, this is a huge decision that you should think about. Do you actually want to kill your baby or not? I'm just going to leave it at that for now on abortion news, but it's just whenever there is good news, I want to point it out. There's a couple of states that did some opposite things. I'm not even going to talk about them today because I just want to celebrate the wins in that. But let's talk about free speech, because where I started was that free speech is dangerous and free speech must be stopped. Right? I mean, isn't that true? Isn't that what we're told? Free speech is dangerous, and speech is literally violence. We're going to talk about that more in a moment, but that is the thing that we have been told, that free speech is actually violence. Or is free speech necessary and must be unhindered? And those are the two arguments. Those are the two arguments that I hear all over social media, which when they're allowed, and all over the news and celebrities and etc. Either you can only say certain things because those things are approved and they're not mis or dis or malinformation, which we're going to talk about definitions of in a second. Or on the other side, you have this argument that is just be able to say whatever you want to say. Nothing is off limits. Those are the two things that I hear. And my contention is neither one of those is actually right. But we're going to talk more about that in a second. But before we do, I want to get to some of these definitions. So in the never-ending list of government agencies with 3 or 4 letters. This is one I didn't even know about until recently. It is, I don't know how to pronounce it, CISA, C-I-S-A. I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this organization, but again, apparently there is a never-ending list of government organizations that are 3 or 4 letters that control virtually everything. Here's another one. This is CISA, C-I-S-A, Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency. Sounds really big and scary. And they're tasked with cybersecurity, infrastructure security, communications, risk management, blah, 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 whatever. But here's where it crosses over, because normally I wouldn't care what they do, but they are defining things that social media companies and other companies are taking and using in terms of definitions, and this is where it gets to literally you and me. So they have defined what is now lumped under this MDM category. I know this is so many acronyms. I hate acronyms, but this is where we are. And MDM is mis and dis and malinformation. And these are words that you've heard over and over again over the past couple of years, more and more so, right? And everybody is like, okay, misinformation, because that's what it was first. All of the other news sites were like, we can't have misinformation. You can't have it on platforms. You can't have it on news. You just can't have misinformation. You're like, okay, misinformation. I kind of understand what that is. And then it was disinformation. You're like, well, what is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? And whether you knew it or not, now we have a third category. That's the MDM. The third category is malinformation. What does that mean? What's malinformation? So we're going to go through these because it is important to our conversation both today and going forward in the public square, because that's what we talk about at Church Public. How do we live in the light of Jesus and be a Christian? And how do we live in this public square, because it's a strange and weird place? So misinformation. Here are the three things: misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. These three things make up what CISA defines as information activities. When this type of content, according to their website, is released by foreign actors, it's foreign influence. But here are the definitions of the three things. Misinformation, the first one. This one probably is the most obvious. Misinformation. It's just false. And it's false, and it may not be, according to them, I'll just read this definition. False, but not created or shared with the intention of causing harm, end quote. That's their definition of misinformation. So that makes sense, right? It's false information. You should be able to tell what false information is, but sometimes you can't, especially in this age of information where everybody is saying everything. Second category is disinformation. Now, disinformation, I'll just read their definition, then we'll talk about it for a second. Disinformation is, quote, deliberately created to mislead, harm, or manipulate a person, social group, organization, or country, end quote. So that's disinformation. And so disinformation is the kind of thing where you intentionally spread false information. So misinformation, it's false. You may or may not say it on purpose or to sway somebody in a bad direction. Disinformation is, you know it's wrong, you're going to tell people, and it's bad information. You're trying to push people in a bad direction. So this is what we heard about. I'm not even going to give examples because you all know examples of this, or at least what the mainstream media and social media groups have said is examples of this. It's pretty obvious. What is disinformation? We heard disinformation campaigns all over the place. So mis and disinformation. This is this third category that's kind of interesting. And again, I hate to overuse the Orwellian term, but this is Orwellian. It just is, in the sense that the definition of this is to, I think, to create a category of things that they don't like, but can't necessarily say is wrong. So this third category, disinformation. Third category is first misinformation, disinformation, and then third category is malinformation. So according to CISA, this government bureaucracy, malinformation is, quote, based on fact, but used out of context to mislead, harm, or manipulate. So I'm going to read that one more time. Based on fact, but used out of context to mislead, harm, or manipulate. So you understand what is being said here? Malinformation is information that isn't necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily false. It's true information, probably, or mostly true information, but it's used in a bad way, and then that information used in a bad way is then bad. So you see where this is going? This is information that is true, but somebody doesn't like it. And because somebody doesn't like it, then it can be categorized in this quote-unquote MDM, this mis, dis, mal information category, and then stricken from social media or anywhere on the planet, apparently. So this malinformation now is a thing that we have to watch out for. And again, malinformation is true, but used out of context or used in a bad way. Why could this be bad? Like, in what instance is true information bad in this universe? And this is where you really get to it. Like, is that bad? Is that a bad thing? And I think what we'll do now is we'll go to Twitter, because Twitter is where all of this comes together. And you have Elon Musk, who has recently come out and offered billions of dollars. It's like $43 billion with a B, to buy Twitter, because he really wants to recreate and reinstitute a free speech public square environment. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But I think we need to get a couple of terms more clear as we get into this. So I think neither one of the things that I had talked about earlier in the two extremes, whether you clamp down on speech you don't like, again, miss, dis, and mal. So even if it's true and you don't like it, that's got to go, right? Or you just allow all speech and everything. This is not a Christian doctrine of free speech. This is neither of those is the Christian view of free speech. The more common conservative, quote unquote, view is really a libertarian view, a liberal libertarian view that free speech is absolute and anything goes. You can be vulgar, you can be profane. Pornography is free and fair as long as, quote unquote, it doesn't hurt anybody. And that's fine. And really anything goes because free speech is and should be free. Is that correct? Is that right? Is that moral? I would say no. This is a very liberal view of free speech, and it's not a Christian view. And I would say it's not even an American view of free speech. Up until the last 5 minutes or so, or really 50 years or so, we all knew this. Here is the distinction. And this should be obvious, but we're in the world where obvious and common sense have just gone out the window. So what has changed is that the Constitution, and if you went back to the founders, if you go back and read the Constitution, you understand the context of where the Constitution came from. The Constitution allowed free political speech. Free political speech. If you had said to any of the founders, hey, free speech allows us to put pornography all over the place so that you can consume it on any device, anywhere you go, all of the time, with no restrictions whatsoever, they probably would have slapped you and perhaps called you out for a duel at dawn to remove you from the planet. I mean, they would have, like, one, laughed, but probably been really insulted because that is not what they were talking about at all. And everybody knew that, again, up until probably 5 minutes ago. It's just this new, like, okay, you have a leftist view and progressive view that you should allow whatever you want. But this quote unquote, which I would say is fake, conservative, liberal and libertarian view of just free speech absolutism is just not good for society either. The Constitution freed political speech and to understand this, we have to go back just a couple of bits here. And I won't give you a boring history lesson, hopefully. Just stay with me for a second. Before the Constitution and the creation of the United States, if you criticized your leader, if you criticized your government, your king, you would face penalty, perhaps even death. This has actually been the norm throughout every kingdom in literally all of history. I'll even go to the Bible on this one. Read the book of Esther and see that the reason she was so courageous, the reason that we look to her even now and say you were born for such a time as this, is that she was willing to risk death to speak to her husband, the king, because she knew just by talking to him, she might be killed. Esther 4:11. All the king's servants, all the people of the king's provinces know, this is Esther talking, that if any man or any woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except to the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that this person may live. But as for me, Esther talking again, I have not been called to come into the king for 30 days. That is Esther 4:11. So that's just one example. You could go to any kingdom on the earth for basically all of time, and this has been the truth because kings, if nothing else, don't want to be told by anybody what to do. This is just the reality. The difference in our political system, and the reason it is, in my opinion, the best political system ever invented, God willing and God bless, the Constitution freed political speech to where you can now freely speak truth to power. You can actually speak and criticize your governor or the administration without penalty of punishment. I even do that, and I don't fear that someone's going to show up at my door and take me off to jail or worse. That has been the norm for all of history. I can't overstate this because we have lived in this free society for so long, and we have grown up in this free America for so long that we have forgotten what we have is not normal. What we have was built through the shedding of blood by people who fought to death for us to be able to say these things to the government and to have this free speech. Again, if you were to suggest to the founders that free speech meant as much pornography as you want, or to curse in public as much as you want with every other word, again, I think they would probably challenge you to a duel. They used to duel all the time. Go, if you haven't read Hamilton, right? I've mentioned this before, but we're at a new level of the upside down, where words are actually violence. And this is where we are. When you get to this free speech absolutism, and free speech is the ultimate value, and freedom is the ultimate value without any regulations at all, with just licentiousness for the sake of licentiousness. Go look up licentious if you don't know what that means. We are in this weird world where if you speak words that people don't like, you're accused of actual violence. I don't mean that figuratively, I mean it literally, and they mean it literally. If you speak something on campus or on social media that is culturally against the norm, you're perpetrating violence. Whereas if you actually burn down a building or a courthouse or a police station in the name of a cultural hero, you are using your right to free speech and free expression. Like, right, the fiery but mostly peaceful protest. We saw that. And this is the new situation that we're in. And this is where Twitter comes into this situation. Twitter has become a place of mis and dis and malinformation, or so the left says. And Twitter has become the de facto public square. It really has. And all these social media places are where the meeting of the minds go to figure out what they believe, what they don't, what's true, what's not. But the left doesn't want to contain these ideas that are contrary to the narrative du jour, the narrative of the day. And as you know, just to recall, Twitter banned a sitting president and now former president. They recently banned the satire site, the Babylon Bee, a literal fake news site. Their whole goal was to have fake news and make fun of culture. They got banned. They banned Charlie Kirk over biologically correct statements, and many more nameless people, like tens of thousands of people, have been removed from Twitter for things that the establishment didn't like. While at the same time, the leader of Iran, the spokesman for the Taliban, many Chinese communist agencies, including the official embassy, Antifa accounts, the dictator of Venezuela, celebrities or who actually called for killing the president, etc. I could go on for a long time in the list of people who are still on Twitter who have literally called for violence, but because the violence was against the other side, it doesn't seem to matter. But again, burn down a police station and you're doing a righteous act. Now that gets us to Elon Musk, who is no conservative. That is something to make a point of. I don't think he's a savior. I don't think he's a conservative. It doesn't seem like he has any faith whatsoever. I'm just not sure. He hasn't really spoken out clearly about it. He seems to be some version of a libertarian, a rather liberal libertarian in some areas. But regardless of labels, he is clearly in favor of free speech. And I think he did sum up very well what the goal of speech should be in this statement.
And reality that speech is as free as reasonably possible. And a good sign as to whether there is free speech is someone you don't like allowed to say something you don't like. And if that is the case, then we have free speech.
I think that's a good definition. He said, quote, "A good sign as to whether there is free speech is someone you don't like allowed to say something you don't like." I think that is a good definition. It is not complete, but it's a good start. That is true. In order for speech to be free, you have to allow for speech that you don't like. You have to allow for people you don't like. That is kind of the essence of Jesus saying, love your neighbor, though the Jesus statement obviously goes farther. We'll talk about that in a minute. Musk went on to say, "I realize the company Twitter will neither thrive nor serve this societal imperative in its current form. It needs to be transformed as a private company." And in other words, he knows that there's this mis and dis and malinformation, either in algorithm or in actual people sitting there like banning people or shadow banning people. Who knows? No one actually knows how it works because they haven't released how it actually works. And they've been very hidden about that. That's one of the issues that Elon or Musk has about this. But my point is this. I think it's really good that he's doing this. And I hope that he actually succeeds. I'm kind of dubious that he will because the powers that be are really against him. Again, you've probably heard the story, but first he got 9 and something percent shares, and so he was the biggest shareholder. So they offered him a seat on the board, and then he said, "No, I don't want to be on the board," because the board of Twitter said, if you come on the board, you can't ever have a controlling interest in the company, and you can't say certain things against Twitter. And he said, well, no, I'm not willing to do that. The whole point is we have to be able to say the right things or whatever we want to say. And then he put in the offer to buy it, and then Vanguard, the super money mogul conglomerate that seems to own almost everything at this point, now bought more shares, and now they have a larger stake than Elon has in the company. And there's a bunch of other details going on in terms of poison pills and this whole deal. The time will tell what actually happens. So I think it is a good step that he wants to buy it, and he has the resources to do it, and we should we should applaud that. I think it's actually a really good step that he wants to do this. But the point that I want to make is a bigger, more global, I would say spiritual and theological point. It's the morality that we have to base on our foundation. And I would say the foundation has to be Jesus, because otherwise we're just building a foundation on whatever we want to build. And you still end up in the same place, just maybe a little bit later. This is what people don't understand, I think, on either side, because I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this. Free speech was never free. I can't say that more strongly. Free speech was never free. Either you say that free speech is dangerous and the mis and dis and malinformation needs to be removed so that our innocent little eyes and ears are not harmed by the quote-unquote violence or literal violence. Or people say that free speech must absolutely be protected in all cases, even up to hate and child porn and all types of vulgarity. Neither one of those is correct. The Christian foundation, and in fact, I would argue the American foundation, made a clear distinction that free speech is speaking truth to politics, speaking truth to the government without fear of penalty. And we, again, all used to know that the way that you had free speech, that's why you have the free right to assembly, peaceful protest. You can stand outside peacefully and you can say what you believe peacefully without the fear of being arrested or shot or whatever, which doesn't exist in other countries and hasn't for all of humanity. I cannot overstate this. I know I'm repeating a lot, but we just have lost touch with the reality that what we have is not normal. We are living in the abnormal. We are living in the utopian moment. I hate using that word, so I'll try to come up with a better word, but we're living in this moment that was created through all of this work and literal shed blood to live in this place where we can do those things without penalty. But now, of course, we've lost the threat of penalty. We have penalty. You get kicked off of social media if you say the wrong thing. If you say a man is a man or a woman is a woman, you get kicked out of the public square. You may get kicked out of your, business. You definitely will get kicked off of your college campus if you say those types of things. They are literally classified as hate speech, and in some colleges, violence if you say things like that. I'm not joking. This is real. So this foundation that we have to have, which is a Christian foundation, not an American foundation, not a liberal or libertarian or leftist foundation. The foundation must be on the Word of God. We used to understand because the culture understood. I posted a picture the other day of New York in 1953 or 56, I forget what it was, where they lit up buildings with the cross on them on Easter morning. And then I also posted a picture where they lit up buildings with the pride colors. We have changed our culture, and the culture influences politics, but religion influences the culture, because we all used to have this foundation, not all, but most of us used to have some kind of Judeo-Christian foundation that bled into our culture, and we understood that. The founders didn't have to write that specifically into the Constitution because we all knew it. We all knew that if we let all of this licentiousness, all of this ridiculous behavior into the culture could not stand, and it definitely could not self-govern. But now apparently we don't know that. And we just expect that you be you and live your truth is going to be a guiding principle that does lead us to a paradise on earth. You have to have a moral society, and all speech is not permissible. Free speech has never been fully free. Free speech has been speaking truth to power in America, and it is also not included like ubiquitous pornography everywhere. I know I keep bringing up that point, but it is a really good point that people just don't equate here. But that is the end result. We think like there's no consequence to absolute free speech in all places. And it's not just hate speech. It's, yes, I agree with Elon's description that you should let people you don't like say things you don't like. That's actually true, but it also has limits, and you should have limits. And this is where we get into actual self-governance that this country was supposed to be founded on and was for, I think, a while, and is clearly not anymore. We don't self-govern. We expect the government to tell us what we want to hear or what they want to tell us, and we expect the government to be our dad and be our nanny and be our teacher and tell us what is right and what is wrong. And the government, one, cannot do that, and two, should not do that. We should not let the government tell us what is morally right and wrong. The government needs to get moral right and wrong from something, and I would suggest the Bible is the place where the government gets that. Of course, more and more that's difficult to do, but this is the only way that we can go forward. So if we can influence the government, we should. If we can influence these weird technocracies like Twitter and other social media companies, like Elon is doing, we should definitely applaud that. But that can't be the end goal. The end goal has to be you following morality in your life, and has to be you leading your family into a spiritual morality. You have to do this in your family, and it has to start there. That's why kids are so important in this whole thing. It's super important to focus on the kids and help them grow. That's why this whole classroom stuff, the Disney stuff talked about before, we'll talk about again later, is really, really important. And if you happen to be in Pennsylvania over the next weekend on Sunday night, I'll be doing a seminar on Disney and classrooms and Disney's war on children and parents that is similar to this topic. You can find more information about that on churchpublic.com. And what I want to end with is this. I want to end with Philippians, where Paul tells us what we should do instead. So you don't have to believe me. You don't have to take my words for it. You can go and read the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And I think at some point you should do that if you haven't done that before, because it's important to understand where we came from. But before that, and the foundation below that, is and should be God. So Paul tells us this in Philippians 4:8. This is a good example that you should go and read and go through to see if your life is going in the right direction. Paul says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any good thing, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And whatever you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice, do these things, and the God of peace will be with you. In other words, it's really, really important to have your own moral place, and that morality has to be based on something, and it has to be based on something that is not in you, because most of these things, if you just read through that list, you don't have on your own. You have to generate, and they have to come from somewhere. And I would say, again, they come from God and the power of the Spirit in you. Go look at the fruit of the Spirit. It's important to tap into these things, and the only way we can do that is through our relationship to Jesus and the power of the Spirit in us. This is the only way that we're going to go forward. Is free speech dangerous? No, not inherently. There should be more speech and there should be free speech, but free speech does have a limit. This mal and dis and misinformation is not the appropriate way to necessarily clamp down on this. There should be rules and guidelines, yes. My guidelines are probably going to be more strict than most of the people's guidelines, but you don't get rid of true things just because you don't like what they say. You get rid of things that are against this type of verse. That's what we have always known as a society that was following after God. But now we've forgotten, because clearly we're not a culture that is following after God. That's why I started Church Public. That's what I see in the world. And I hope that's how you go forward as you're looking at the people in your family, the people in your life, the people that you interact with on a daily basis. That's Church Public. That's living out your faith in the world, in culture, which you should definitely be doing. And this is one of the ways. Go and read Philippians 4. Read Philippians 4:8 and following. That will help you understand how to practically do these things. Paul says, practice them. It's not just knowing things in your head and knowing this theology. It's what do you actually do with it? It's really, really important. So I applaud Elon. Great job. I hope that he takes over Twitter. I'm dubious to whether it's going to actually happen. We'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, for you, as you cultivate your own relationship with God and your own sanctification, as you follow after God and move closer and closer towards him in holiness, think about these things. I hope that God blesses you and keeps you, and I hope that through all of this, you keep the faith. Till next time.